Maybe. There we go. We are
I'm
live.
back.
Hello, Internet.
I'm back.
Today we get to talk about Alaska.
Yeah.
Have you ever
Not
been to
often.
Alaska?
I've never been to Alaska, no.
Well, when we start recording, I will share some Alaska isms. I spent a week in Fairbanks, Alaska. So, yeah, it's interesting. Well, welcome everyone who's here today. This is our second recording today. We're recording episode 496 today of the Concealed Carry podcast. We appreciate anyone who jumps in here live with us and participates. We'll be monitoring comments, etc. In today's episode, we're going to actually kind of hyper focus on a single defensive gun use out of Alaska, Fairbanks, Alaska. Man, it's cold in Fairbanks, Alaska. And so we're going to talk about this particular incident. It has a number of lessons to be learned, and there's a positive outcome on this one. So, there's some all around good takeaways. Hello, Tony. Thanks for being here.
Once again.
Yep. Once again, that's right. It's a twofer. Wednesdays are like that. Don't stray too far from the computer on Wednesday. Yeah, we're also going to address an email that we got from a listener today. Most of the emails we get, we generally just reply via email and address them here. But this one we thought was worth reading out loud and addressing live. Welcome, Cammie. Thanks for being here. So that's kind of our plan for today. We're going to hyper focus in on this DGU justified story out of Alaska, and then we're also going to respond to this comment from a listener. That's the plan. Hello, Brett. Thanks for being here.
And I'll be monitoring the comments to see if Riley happens to comment us. So far, he hasn't. So
he's on the ground. He's off the plane now. So maybe
excuses.
Yeah, maybe he'll jump in. Who knows? So we will ignore him completely, like he's not even there. We're gonna share all the other comments but his. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start the recording. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode 496. Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network, brought to you by XS Sites. Today is Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. I am your host, Jacob Paulson, and I am also joined today by Matthew Marister.
Once again, greetings, sir.
Yep. And the weather is windy but sunny out here in Colorado, and we're excited to get rolling with today's topic. Are guns a deterrent against crime? Today we're going to be responding to an email we received from a listener of the podcast, and then we're going to be hyper focusing on a specific justified incident out of Fairbanks, Alaska. And so that'll be fun. But before we do that, before we get too far, a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by XS Sites. There are a number of companies out there that sell aftermarket sights, and I think that sights are a pretty viable thing to consider to upgrade from a stock gun. Most guns don't come with particularly amazing sights. And one of the things that I've learned, I think, I'm still learning, but one of the things I've been learning later in my journey as a concealed carrier is the importance and value of quality sights, and XS Sights are absolutely fantastic. They have several different models, but I think what they really specialize in, I think that the thing that sets them apart is big, fast site acquisition. This idea of you've got to be blind to not see our sites and to acquire them quickly. I guess that's my 2 cents on XS Sites. More to come as they're now the title sponsor of our podcast network. So you'll hear more about XS Sites, but you can always go and check out their products at xssites.com. That's X-ray.
Sierra.
I don't know what.
Sierra.
Sierra. That's the official. I was going to say something else, and I was like, there's real words for these things. I wasn't cool in the military like Matthew, so I don't know my phonetic alphabet. So xssites.com. Also, today's episode is brought to you by the Legal Boundaries by State book. This is a book now in its, 5th or 6th edition that we publish here at concealedcarry.com. It is a legal reference book of gun laws in all 50 states. And once you buy it, you get permanent access to the latest edition of the ebook every time it's updated. And we're probably going to be releasing a new edition in July or August because we've seen a lot of things changing so far this year. So I would encourage you to get your copy right away so that you'll always be notified when there are updates and changes to that book. You can learn more at concealedcarry.com/gun law book. We are recording this episode today live, so we do have live viewers, and they'll be probably throwing in some comments, and so we may call some of those out or respond to those as they come in. All right, Matthew, I think that's all the necessary prerequisites.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So let's start with this email we received. Last week, we recorded episode 492, and in that episode, Riley and I, we discussed mindset. We talked about the 6 elements of a mindset, of a strong mindset, and we kind of went through those one by one. I don't even know if I could name them all from heart, since it's kind of a new concept in our company, but defensive, determined, disciplined, aware, avoidance, and I'm missing one of the other D's. Diligent, yes. The one I suck at the most. That's kind of ironic. So we kind of talked about the 6 elements of a mindset, of a good, strong mindset. And we got an email from someone named, we didn't get his permission to say his name, so maybe we won't say his name. But I'm going to go ahead and just read his email out loud. And then, Matthew, I'm going to let you share your thoughts, and then I'll circle back as well.
Sure.
So it says the following. Hey, guys, love the podcast. I have a question, however. In listening, especially to your recent podcast concerning having a defensive mindset, I noticed a recurring theme. Much of what you said about the various subjects involved being very alert, making sure you're at the top of your physical fitness, ready to run, grapple, and generally being always at 100%. Speaking for myself, I am rarely anywhere near 100%. I am fit, I am strong, but due to certain physical issues, I am almost always tired, in extreme pain, and even exhausted. My body is destroying itself, so today is as good as I'll ever feel the rest of my life. There's no way as vigilant and on their game as they can be, but for many people, that amounts to simply being happy they can even walk that day. Head up, chin up. Maybe I can look around while I shuffle along. At least I don't need a cane yet. You see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to be contrary. I'm simply trying to correlate your advice with my reality. Any help in that area would be a boon. Thank you for reading. Please keep up the good work. End of quote. So, Matthew.
Yes.
What were your thoughts when you saw this? Like, what if Tom was sitting here in front of you? What would you tell him?
Yeah, it was actually when I got the email, I was like, man, it's a super smart, email, and something that can definitely kind of be glossed over, or it requires an address. And I think that's why I really proposed, to you that we do this, as a whole episode. And because it's super important. I'm with you. I almost said your name. I'm with the writer of this email, right? Like, I have had 4 or 5 knee surgeries. I just had a shoulder surgery. I've been in and out of different surgeries or different joints and stuff. And I'm with you. Like, I have chronic pain. I'm not the strongest guy, certainly not as strong as I used to be. And so I'm in a lot of pain as well, just like you. And I see things that I used to be able to do as far as, wrestling and defensive control stuff. And I wish I could do it with the same intensity and the same strength and everything like that. So I'm with you. I think one of the things in the comment that was, or the email that was stood out to me, it says, making sure that you're at the top of your physical fitness. And I think that that's an individual thing, right? Like, top of your physical fitness at that day is different than what the top of my physical fitness is that day. And, I might be rehabbing an injury. I'm going to be as best as I can for that day at that point in my life. Right. And I have to live in that reality, not somebody else's, or not what I used to be, 6 months ago, or potentially what I could be in 6 months after I rehab, or once I start, doing more cardio, maybe I had, So my point is that in general, and I'll give it back to you, Jacob, but in general, I think it's important that we judge ourselves against where we can be the best given our circumstances. And it might not be as good as it was yesterday, or it could be tomorrow, but wherever we are, we should try to make sure at least physically we're as good as we can be. And where we see that we're diminishing in certain areas, maybe pick up somewhere else, have a more alert mind, because I know now my reaction time is a little bit slower. I can't fight as long. So now maybe, I have to mitigate those risks a little bit differently. So that's kind of where I would start.
Mm-hmm. A lot of this email from this listener is focused around physical limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe I'm not as slow, maybe I'm in pain, or not as fast, I'm in pain, I can't move quickly, etc. But I think that we have to recognize that there are tons of limitations beyond just the physical. My own knowledge, education, training, and experience is a limitation. What I wear is a limitation. Where I go or where I live or how I conduct myself is a potential limitation. My employment could be a limitation. Maybe I'm not allowed to have a gun with me at work. You could have family situations. Maybe you live with a felon. That's a pretty significant limitation to having guns with you. There's just a ton of legal issues. You could live, if you live in New Jersey, that limits you on the ammunition you can carry in your gun. Maybe you live in a place that has a magazine capacity limitation, or a variety of other legal limitations. So I guess the first place my brain went when I read this email from the listener is I thought to myself, none of us can rise up to the level of perfection. Like, none of us are John Wick, right? Like, if we're really talking like the standard, like what's the standard, right? Like, the standard would be I'm some just bad to the bone, grappling, hand fighting, armed to the tooth person with tons of ammo, spare mags, a baton, pepper spray, taser, a couple of flashlights, and my head's on a swivel all the time. And I've practiced with all of these different things and retention systems. And, I'm like a cop on duty combined with Dwayne Johnson, combined with, John Wick. Like, and it's just, you really going to rue the day you screw with me. That's just not, like, none of us are there. All of us are limited in some way by our experience, by our knowledge, by our physical ability. And so, am I more physically able to, run the other way than maybe, my dad? Yes, I suspect that's very true. However, I assure you, I'm not as physically fit as I should be. Right? Am I, should I be aware of my surroundings all the time? Totally. But am I? No, for sure not. Sometimes I'm focused on this, what my kid is trying to tell me, and I'm not understanding what they're saying. And it's I'm tired and I want to get home, and they're trying to, ask me this question while we're out and about doing whatever thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, just explain this. Like, can you say that again? So I just want to go home. Right. So I'm constantly distracted. I'm not always alert to what's going on. So I think, Mr. Listener who wrote us that email, that take it in the context that we're all just on the journey somewhere. That's how I think of it. Like, we're just all on the journey. We all have limitations. Often our own knowledge and experience and training is one of the most significant limitations. Sometimes it's a physical limitation. We've had classes. I've had students in my class in wheelchairs and all sorts of other kinds of physical limitations. So we all just got to say, this is where I'm at. And I think to me, the takeaway is to perform a self-evaluation and figure out where you're weakest and address it. I'll give you an example. A year or two ago, I started to notice a lot of conversation in our industry, self-defense handgun industry, about medical. I'm not saying it wasn't happening before that, but just it kind of got on my radar. Everyone's talking about emergency medical and stop the bleed and tourniquets and stuff. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't know much about that stuff. It's really completely outside of my wheelhouse. And so I identified that as a place I was weak relative to my overall ability to survive life and be prepared for emergencies. So I looked at that as, that's a weak point of mine. I need to address that. right? So I invested some time and some energy into getting the good gear and getting some training and education and learning how to use that gear, etc. And when we did that episode a couple episodes ago about mindset, we talked about the 6 different elements of a strong mindset. I don't remember if we said this on the podcast, but it was certainly my intention to basically say, this isn't about being perfect in all 6 categories. This is about identifying which category you're weakest in and doing something about it. And all limitations aside, you can always improve somewhere on something. The point is to pick, right? To identify something and do something about it.
Yeah, and I would add to that as well is some of the physical stuff. We may not be as strong as we used to be. So then how can we mitigate the deficiency there, right? Like we can only get so strong as we age, right? Like we might have some sort of injury or whatnot. So what can I do that makes me a little bit easier to survive a fight, right? Like what do I have to do? Well, maybe I have to change some of the things I do. Maybe I don't go out and drink alcohol because that's already something that's going to diminish my ability to kind of keep my situational awareness and pay attention to what's around me. So I'm, a situation where I might have been able to survive with my just sheer strength or youth or energy and that I can't do that. So what do? I think smart, or I strategize a little bit smarter, right? Maybe it's not that I'm trying to get stronger or get my draw from 1.5 seconds to 1 second. Maybe because of physical limitations, that's the max I can, I'm solid there. I'm good. I can't seem to get much lower, but I maintain that. So I don't just say the discipline part is like, I maintain that. I don't just say, well, I'm getting older, I can't do this and things. So I'm just not going to practice, right? Like, not if you don't practice, if you're not training, if you're not challenging yourself or learning new techniques and testing your gear and doing these things at a regular interval, you're not only are you not getting better, but you're actually getting worse, right? Like in the long run, because those skills are diminishing. So at least, that discipline mindset of physical fitness is, I'm going to do what I can to survive physically, being healthy, eating right, doing, if I smoke, maybe I'm trying to stop smoking because I know that that's not great for me. So I'm trying to do these things. I'm trying to potentially maintain or maintain certain standards of skill set, right? And so I think, in my mind, that's kind of where I am is, yeah, we're all diminishing, we're all deteriorating to one point or another, some quicker than others. But what are we doing to try to mitigate some of those things, and how can we still win a fight or stay out of a fight? And as we get older, we get a little bit more wise, and we start using our brain a little bit more than our brawn. So maybe that's also a sort of a strategy as well there.
I like that. My big thing was, hey, we're all weak, pick something and work on it. And I think that my big takeaway from what you said was you as we get older, perhaps, or for whatever reason, we tend to put more things in our liability column. So the idea is to balance those liabilities with some specific assets that help mitigate risk or minimize those liabilities. And so I think that sounds pretty smart to me. Very good, very good, very good. So good thoughts. Listener, thank you for the email. We do read all the emails that come in. If you want to email us here at the show, you can just email podcast@concealedcarry.com. And those do get through. Sometimes it takes us a little while to respond, but we do receive them, I think. I guess if we're not receiving some, I wouldn't know about it. But I think we're getting them all. Okay, so we're going to transition a little bit now, and we're going to talk about an incident from Fairbanks, Alaska. Before we started recording, Matthew, I asked you if you'd ever been to Alaska, and you said no, right?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. You've probably been to Hawaii.
Yes. A couple times.
See, I'm the opposite. I've never been to Hawaii, but I've been to Alaska. In my experience, it's people have been to one, but not the other. So I spent 4 days in Fairbanks, Alaska in February of 2010. Mm-hmm. And if you're ever going to visit Fairbanks, I don't suggest February. So it's so cold and daylight is limited. But this particular incident that we're going to talk about today looks like it happened here recently in March there in Fairbanks, Alaska. And it really all goes down at a gas station. So I think maybe the best way to kind of approach this, Matthew, is to give people the narrative, just broadly speaking, and then maybe we go back and just address some of the things that we think are critical takeaways.
Sure. You want to?
That's up to you, brother. I'm leaving it on you. Why don't you give us the narrative?
Okay, so here it is. This is a story I think we can pull a lot of stuff out. I'll give the quick overview, and then I'll give it back to you, Jacob, for the little down and dirty. So. Headline is Good Samaritan Stops Robbery at Alaska Gas Station. Good story, good outcome. So here's what happens. Fairbanks, Alaska. Fairbanks resident stops an attempted robbery at a Holiday gas station. So the incident started when a 17-year-old allegedly walks into this gas station with a knife. He tells the employee at the counter that he's robbing the store. The person who we're talking about, Nick Moore, he is a customer in the store. He's buying something. He sees what's going on, alert, paying attention, sees this guy come in, pulls out a knife, says he's robbing the store. So he puts the things he's going to buy on like the counter, and runs out to his car to get his handgun. Okay. So make point of that. Runs out to the store to get his handgun. He comes back into the store and racks the slide, points the gun at the bad guy, tells him to get on the ground, and the guy complies. Police arrive on the scene, arrest the bad guy, and everything's good. No shots fired, no harm, no foul. And I think it even says that they gave this Nick Moore a free meal or something like that at this store, this gas station or something. So anyways, good story. But there's a couple things that we pulled out that we thought were really things that we could point out, good and bad, and then tie back into the mindset that article or concept that we were talking about with the email from the listener. So I guess I'll hand it back over to you, Jacob, so you can kind of start parsing it out.
So the first critical thing to understand about this incident is it happened in Fairbanks, Alaska. So it was cold, so cold. That place is so cold. Like imagine a place where you don't run water pipes under the ground because they'll freeze.
Yeah.
So people have water tanks on top of their house because it's less likely to freeze than a pipe going under the ground. It's just so cold.
Wow.
I showed up in Alaska. I'm sorry, I can't help this. I show up in Alaska, and in Alaska, when you get a rental car at the rental counter, they give it to you with an extension cord, so that you can plug in the engine block heater, and they look at you like you're an idiot too. If they're like, let me explain what an engine block heater is, and I'm like, it's cool. I'm from Wyoming. I know what it is, but in my head, I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, where am I going to plug it in? Like, am I going to run an extension cord into the hotel lobby? But it doesn't matter because every parking spot in every business in Fairbanks, Alaska has a power outlet for this reason. Walmart has power outlets in every parking stall. The hotel has an outlet in every parking stall. So anyway, the place is freaking cold. I just can't get over it. So it's freezing cold. So this guy, Nicholas Moore, our Good Samaritan, he's got good awareness, right? He sees someone coming into the store, and so he's paying attention. Good awareness, doing a good job with that element of a good mindset. He sees it happening. And I don't think it said the guy had a ski mask on or anything, but he had a knife in his hand. So, and he says something like, I kind of thought I knew what was happening, but I took a step back in the line from away from the counter. So I kind of, would not be in the way. And I wanted to kind of observe what was going to happen. He says something along those lines. And then he hears the guy say something like, give me the money, or this is a robbery, or, whatever it is he says. And now he's clued in, right? He knows what's going on. Now he's buying his breakfast, people who buy breakfast at gas stations, they buy breakfast at gas stations regularly. So I would assume that he's probably pretty familiar with this gas station. He probably comes here frequently, if not every single morning. Holiday, by the way, is the brand of gas station. It's not like a gas station that's on Holiday. I know that could be confusing because Fairbanks is like 10 miles from a city called North Pole, where the street lights look like candy canes. It's awkward. Anyway, so the Holiday gas station. So he knows his environment. He's very aware of what's happening, all those things. But probably the first obvious thing to point out here is he doesn't have this gun with him. It's in the car. And he says he carefully puts his stuff down on the counter and sneaks. He uses the word sneaks out of the gas station to go get his gun. This is a hard one for me. I don't know about you, Matthew. Like I see a lot of concealed carry students. I teach a lot of concealed carry classes. I go through thousands of students. I just see a lot of students, and I think a large percentage of them, they either start out with the intention of keeping a gun in the car and or in the house or in a bag, or just because it becomes uncomfortable or inconvenient, they end up doing it. And they go from trying a holster or something to saying, "Oh my gosh, this is too uncomfortable, or I can't handle this. Let's keep I'm just going to keep this in the glove box, or I'm going to keep this in the console because I'm in my car a lot, or I can always run out and get it," kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I think a relatively high percentage of people do think that. Hopefully none of the listeners of our podcast, because we've harped on this before. But Matthew, is that your sense? Like, do you think a lot of people are in that category?
Well, I would say, and to be honest, or to be fair, we don't know the person in this story. We don't know if he's a brand new concealed carrier, what his situation is. But I would say, yes. I mean, I think it goes to that diligent part of the mindset, is that like, you don't fall into the mindset of like, all right, well, and I don't know what the crime rate is, and I'm speculating. I'm not saying that this was his mindset, but I'm just saying, well, I'm just going up to this gas station. I'll leave the gun in the car because this isn't a really bad area. Or I'm just running up. I'll leave the gun in the car. Or, I'm wearing these types of clothes and it just I can't really conceal it well with these clothes. So, I'm just throw it in the car. Those types of things, they may seem little, but they end up, I think overall, they start to build a pattern where it's easier to leave the gun behind or to talk yourself out of carrying the gun, which in this case, he was able to go out. But I do think that initially there's either a big like push, like I'm going to carry it every day. And they're determined to find the right holster, and they'll go through holsters and they'll go through guns and get it. Or more often than not, there's a determination at the beginning, like, okay, I think I can carry, but then they don't put in like the trial and error process of, or they're not comfortable enough to start carrying every day. So it just doesn't become a habit, and it never does become a habit.
This is a hard one because we're talking about what things that me and Matthew see as problems, issues, but it had a positive outcome. Mm-hmm. Right? So in this case, it wasn't an issue that the gun wasn't with our friend Nick Moore. I say our friend, we've never met. It wasn't an issue for him. It turned out just fine, but it could have been an issue. And certainly we've reviewed many news stories where that would have been a significant problem. If you think that you have time to go out and get it, I mean, in the time it takes to go get it, assuming you can get out of the store and get to it at all, in that time, some people could be getting stabbed or shot or whatever else. That could be really bad. And not to mention, you now have to make a re-entry into a situation that you really aren't in very good control of. I just don't think anything about that is super smart and awesome. We actually did an interview. This is many an episode ago, probably in the late 80s, 90s, or early 100s episode numbers. We interviewed this guy who was involved in a self-defense incident at a gas station where he was in his gym shorts. And so because he was in his gym shorts, he left his gun in the car. And he walked into the gas station, and as he was walking toward the door of the gas station, a criminal had abducted the clerk from behind the counter and was telling her that he was going to, take her out in the desert and do naughty things and bury her. And he walked into this. And he's like, oh, crap. And he had to run back to the car and get his gun. And while he's trying to get his gun out of the car, he gets accosted by the criminal, attacks him right there. And he has to go hands-on before he can get his gun. Yeah, I just, yeah, it's so easy to justify. It's so easy to become complacent, to fail in that aspect, or to just not, sometimes you become complacent. Sometimes you just never build the habit to begin with, like you said. So got to have it on you. And I'll add that just generally speaking, keeping a gun in the car is a bad idea anyway. It's probably I'm making up the statistic. I don't really know this factually true, but I have seen data and reports that lead me to believe that a vehicle is the most common place for a criminal to find and steal a gun. The criminals do break into cars, and that's a common way for them to obtain a gun illegally. I know here in Denver, the local Denver chief of police called it a pandemic. This was before COVID. This was like February 2019 or something. But vehicle theft from cars was up like 300 and something % year over year in Denver. And we've seen a trend across the country of more and more guns being stolen out of cars. So don't store a gun in a car. That's not a staging place. And if you do it, obviously, hope you do it in a secure way. But if you think that's the gun you're going to go to retrieve in an emergency, you got a problem. Mm-hmm. You may or may not be able to get to it. The time it's going to take to get to it is going to cause problems. I just don't see anything really smart about that.
Yeah, and I think maybe it's important just to mention, like, if you're a new concealed carrier and you're just listening to this and you're like, well, I can't conceal it with all my clothing, or I don't feel my gun doesn't feel comfortable. I'm not saying you don't feel comfortable carrying a loaded gun on you. I'm saying physically it doesn't feel comfortable, or it prints or something like that. I just want to let you know that everybody, if you talk to anybody who's been carrying a firearm concealed for any long period of time, they will tell you they've gone through a whole process of different holsters, different carry positions on their body, different guns even, but different belts, different clothing styles, maybe getting something as simple as getting a pair of pants that is an inch or two in the waist larger than than your typical pants, or a belt that's more suitable for carrying a firearm, or an actual holster that's, if you're carrying appendix or a specific position made for that, makes a world of difference. I mean, I talk to people all the time that are trying to conceal a shield, and they're like, I can't conceal it, it's too big. And you can carry a full size, duty size, Glock handgun, and they're like, well, it can't be comfortable. And it's all about the gear or the holster setup and all that. So what my point is don't give up on it because the first holster you've tried doesn't conceal well, because it probably won't. That's just the process of it. So and not to go in that whole, I don't want to get too down that road, but just don't lose heart. We're not just saying, hey, everybody, the minute you throw your gun on, it's going to be concealable, comfortable, and everything. It just doesn't happen, but it is a process.
Yeah. You got to be diligent, and you have to be willing to experiment and figure it out. And you also have to figure out like your minimum viable loadout. MVL. Ooh, I just made out a term. And now I have to write an article. Yeah, your MVL, your minimum viable loadout. Like, you've got to figure out where your starting point is, and you can always improve, but you got to figure out your starting point. And the starting point is not keeping a gun in the car and hoping that's what you're going to use to defend yourself. I also have a concern with the general mindset here, or the concern with the defensive mindset. When the person says, I'm going to set my stuff down on the counter, I'm going to run out and go get a gun, then come back in here and take care of this problem. Like, what is the objective? I just want, like, if you're listening to this, I'm asking you, what is the objective of that person? Is the objective survival? It can't be. If your only objective was your own survival and you can get out of the store, you would run and you would not come back. So it's clearly not your survival. So is your objective defending innocent people? The clerk behind the counter, the other people in the holiday gas station? That's possible. But I got to ask if that's the most effective way to achieve that. I mean, just trying to help us understand, like, what is the real objective here? It would seem to me, I think it's at very least, possible to assume that the objective of Mr. Moore was to stop the criminal from escaping and completing their crime and bring them to justice. If you can do that in a way that's completely safe to all people, I don't, then maybe you can justify it, but it's tactically concerning, and it's probably illegal. I mean, this is probably illegal. Just you can go listen to episode 1 of our podcast where we talked about the laws concerning this. When you walk out of that gas station, you don't have an immediate threat anymore. When you walk back in, you're choosing to exercise force, right? You're choosing to put someone in fear of with your gun, and that's hard to legally justify, especially when you submit someone to custody and prevent their escape, right? When you say get down on the ground, you're not allowed to leave, you have to stay here. I think that the mindset there is not a defensive mindset. I think it is a mindset concerned with the outcome of that individual, with bringing them to custody. And I think we have some other legal issues, and maybe we'll circle back around to that when we get toward the end of the convo here.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. And you ask a good question. So you said, think about what's the objective. So put yourself, as you're listening to this, put yourself in the position of this person. You see this, your gun's in the car. Okay. I'm going to go out, grab my gun, and I'm going to come in. And my objective is I'm going to stop this from, this guy from either robbing the place or harming anybody. I get it. The more, or as an important question as that is how are you going to do it? How are you going to execute this? And if your idea is, I'm just going to point the gun at somebody, and that's as far as I'm thinking ahead, right? Like, I'm just going to point the gun, and that's going to get I'm going to get to my objective of stopping this. You're not in the right frame of mind, because, and here's why. I don't want to jump ahead, but there's a portion of this guy's statement that's really important, and it'll make sense once I read it. So the guy was interviewed, Nick, and he says in the interview, it says, Moore went on to say he wasn't planning on using his gun, but that he's glad he had it. He also said he feels having a gun deters crime, and in quotations, they're talking about the gun, a shield against thieves, a deterrent against most crimes. If people know that your establishment could be armed, or people in that establishment could be armed, end quote. So my question is so you want to go in there with your firearm and stop whatever bad stuff is going to, great. That's noble. That's great. Whether it's legally justified, I don't know. But like, my next question to you is, how are you going to do this? If your idea is, I'm going to point the gun because it's a shield and it's going to deter the crime. In this case, yes, just pointing the gun worked, right? He didn't have to fire a shot. But if your idea is, I wasn't planning on using the gun, the gun should never even be out of the car. It should have been still in the car, because if you're not planning on it, if you're not willing to use that gun, planning doesn't mean that I'm going in there guns a-blazing, just shooting. Planning means I've thought ahead of this and said, if I have to use the gun, I will, right? Like, but I think there's my problem with the mindset here is that it doesn't take into consideration anything that could happen once this person sees that you have a firearm and says, I'm not scared of a firearm. I've been shot before. I've been in prison, whatever, and I'm just going to start attacking you. And if you've already gone with that plan, I think that you're setting yourself up for failure, among other things. And I'll let you. I don't want to hog the time, so I'll send it back to you, because I know you wanted to make a point about this specific mindset issue.
Yeah, no, I think you're on point, right? It's the guy's interview comments suggest he was not prepared to use that gun if that's what it came down to. Yeah.
Mhm.
In this case, we're talking about a knife. Guy's got a pointy thing, and pointy things hurt for sure, but they require a relatively short distance between the attacker and the victim. But when you introduce the gun, sometimes it escalates the situation. Sometimes it doesn't de-escalate it; it completely escalates it. And so that's a risk you have to take. You have to, you don't know the answers, right? In hindsight, we know. In hindsight, we know that the gun did de-escalate. This guy got on the ground and he waited for the cops to show up. In what we don't know, even in hindsight, is what would have happened if the gun had never been introduced. Would this dude have just gotten some cash out of the drawer and left? No one would have been hurt. Because if that was the likely scenario, if that's what would have happened, and we'll never know, and you introduce the gun, because you introduced the gun, someone gets shot or stabbed, then now we have more pain, more injury than we would have had if the gun hadn't been introduced at all. So that doesn't mean it was a bad idea. It just means that we don't know. You're always rolling the dice in these situations. And introducing the gun, you have to be committed, right? You have to be determined. That's that element of the mindset we were talking about, that, hey, if I'm going to introduce this gun, I'm ready. I'm willing. I'm prepared. And if that means trigger's got to get pressed, trigger's got to get pressed. And introducing a gun in a situation where you're not willing, you're not determined to do what's going to be required, makes zero sense. Like, what happens if this dude goes to stab you? You're going to like hit him over the head with the gun? I don't know what the thinking was there. And maybe this Nicholas Moore would have done just fine, and all would have been good. And sometimes people get kind of weird in an interview and whatever else. Maybe he was just like flustered and said what came to his mind, and in hindsight he was like, yeah, no, I didn't want to have to shoot the whatever, right? But it certainly suggests that there might have been a failure there in the mindset.
Yeah, we never want to shoot somebody. Our idea is never to go in guns ablaze and just shoot people. So I get that, but like I think, and I could be speculating, but when I hear somebody say that guns are a shield against thieves or they're a deterrent, sure, they're a deterrent against, he says, a deterrent against most crimes. I don't know if most, some, I don't know, the number of crimes that are a deterrent against. I will say that simply having a gun is not a shield. It's not going to protect you against a bad guy shooting at you. You could be an awesome shooter. You could have a sub-second draw. That gun doesn't protect you against somebody from shooting you. It doesn't protect you against bullets, right? So all it does is it gives you an opportunity to use a tool that's effective at stopping somebody. So I think that we have to get away from this idea that just having a gun somehow protects us. It doesn't. It's just a tool that you can use. The training and your mindset and your ability to use the gun is what protects you, but not the gun in and of itself. It's just like when people say, well, there's guns don't kill people, people kill people. Exactly. Guns don't protect people, people protect people with guns. And it's the same argument. But I think if we understand criminals, vicious criminals or very violent criminals are not deterred by a person with a gun. They're just not. I mean, I'm just being honest, like from pointing guns at people as a police officer and telling them, you're going to get shot, and them saying, I don't care. What are you going to do to me? I can tell you that I've fought with people that want to take my gun from me, and they know other people with guns are coming, and they still are not deterred by the presence of a gun. So to think, yes, some people will say, I don't want to attack that person or pickpocket them or whatever because they have a gun. But those people are probably not the people that you're most concerned about. You should be most concerned about the violent criminals that look at somebody with a firearm and say, I want a firearm. That person's nothing to me. I just assume smash your face in with a brick and I'll get a gun out of it. So those are the people that are not deterred. So I think that mindset really sets you up for failure in the long run. So,
I also think that as an industry, sometimes we make broad statements that are factually incorrect. Because as an industry, we kind of have this agenda against gun-free zones, right? This agenda that like, oh, gun-free zones are dangerous because it's an invitation to criminals to come do criminal things. That I think there's an absolute element of truth to that. I 100% agree with that, broadly speaking. But the problem is if it leads you to believe that the lack of a gun-free zone is a deterrent to crime, you're crazy. This is a perfect. I mean, this guy. I mean, Nicholas Moore. Again, what he said doesn't make sense because he just watched someone walk into a gas station with a knife trying to commit a crime. Hopefully, because he lives in Alaska, fully aware that anyone in that gas station could have a gun. So it didn't deter that criminal. Did it? I mean, it sure didn't. And crimes happen in places where guns are allowed all the time. The vast majority of gas stations probably do allow a gun in most states. So anyway, I guess take that in balance and let's not say things like, should we get rid of gun-free zones? Should guns be allowed places? Would that help? Probably, yes, I agree. But because guns are allowed somewhere, does that mean that it's no longer going to be targeted for crime? No, that's ridiculous. That doesn't make sense.
Sure.
And everything you said, also good and important. All right, so let's talk about this interesting detail. Guy walks in, gets his gun from the car, comes into the gas station, and racks the slide. Like on TV. I don't know what it is, but every single TV show ever, you got to rack that slide.
You have to.
It's like it's impossible to chamber a gun off camera in Hollywood. It's got to be chambered while the camera is rolling, and hopefully while the criminal is listening. So that's what happened here. This guy's gun clearly does not have a round in the chamber. Goes out to the car, grabs the gun, comes in, racks the slide. Now. Our feelings about carrying it around the chamber, I think, are pretty well established. If you don't know, you can go listen to episode 18, the first episode ever that Matthew is a part of. You can also go listen to, oh man, now I got to go look up the number, but it's very recently. Riley and I just hashed this out. Let's see. Episode 490. So episode 18 and episode 490, we talk about carrying with around in the chamber. And I'll give you the real short version of the answer, and that is that our stance on this is it's probably good to practice and work and get to the point where you're comfortable enough to carry with around in the chamber. It doesn't make you a bad person if you don't. It just means that you probably are not there yet on that particular topic. And again, as mentioned earlier, a lot of us are not there yet on a number of variety of ready related things. This is one of those. So this particular man, Nicholas Moore, didn't have a round in the chamber, came in. And whether he was thinking about this or not, effectively the sound of racking the slide was intended or effectively became a deterrent to the criminal. It drew attention to the gun and caused this criminal to say, "Oh, you have a gun." And then with some verbal commands, he gets down on the ground, sets down the knife. So what are your thoughts there, Matthew?
Yeah. So I didn't talk to you about this beforehand, but I'm curious if you've had the same experience recently. And every so often I have some students in the class in a concealed carry class. And when they'll ask about, should you carry it with the round in the chamber? And I carry in the appendix position. So I was talking and one of the students is like, so wait, hang on, you carry your gun right there. And I'm like, yeah, it's in a holster. He said, you just tuck it in your waistband? And I'm like, no, it's in a holster. And so I show him the holster and he's like, so you carry with the round in the chamber? And I said, yeah. And he looked like he wanted to get up and run out of the class. Like he was baffled. He said, wait, so a round in the loaded? And I said, yeah, loaded. He's like, well, why loaded? And so, and he's like, so, but it's on safe. And I'm like, no, there's no external lever or safety switch or anything like that. He's like, wait. And he looked at me like, I don't know, was holding Roman candles and shooting them, shooting fireworks out of my hands. Like I was the most irresponsible person. And I try to explain to him and I'm walking him through, how does the trigger work and how does the gun go bang and all this stuff. But I realized that there's a fundamental thing in I realized this a long time ago, but it's always good to refresh and kind of have it refreshed in your mind that there are people that look at having a gun, just the mere presence of the gun, even gun owners, as somehow the gun may just go off. It may just go off. And so I think that there's a little bit of that. And obviously, like you said, we need to get to a point where we trust the gear that we're using and understand how it works. So we can say, yeah, there are guns that just go off, but typically they've been monkeyed with. There's some mechanical problem. There's some, old gun or something like that modern guns, if the trigger is secure and it's in the holster, they're not going to go off. They just, I'm not going to put myself liability and say 100,000%, but like when you see a news article that says gun just goes off, the gun usually doesn't just go off. So I think we have to do some if you're not familiar or comfortable carrying with the round in the chamber, I think, like you said, you have to get towards that or realize that, because it's not just about speed. It's not because you can rack a slide pretty quickly on the draw, and maybe you're only a difference of a second, right? And in many situations that might not be an issue. I think it's less to do with the speed and more to do with the dynamics of using a gun in a fight and not having two hands all the time. Maybe you're defending against a strike or whatnot. So I think that's more for me where I am, rather than the speed component, because speed you might not always need a sub-second draw, right? So I think that's probably one of the big elements for me.
Yeah, I don't think I'll add anything to that, because I think you addressed that as sufficiently as could be expected given our time constraint here. And so the last thing I'll add to this kind of part of this narrative is racking a slide a deterrent, right? Like pumping a shotgun, kind of concept that we've heard that one before. Yeah, just pump that shotgun. People hear the cha-ching and they'll be like, oh no, I should cower and run away. I think it's fair to say reasonably that, the sound of a slide racking or a shotgun pumping or whatever could be a deterrent. Like that, I think it's completely plausible. In this case, it might have been, or it might not have been. I think that when someone hears a gun, it certainly draws attention to the sound, but just as readily you could just say, hey, or stop, and they might look at you and see there's a gun in your hand. So I don't know that it is a valid, reliable technique to create compliance. I guess that's my 2 cents. I definitely don't think that the benefits outweigh the downside. I think that the upside of having a round in the chamber all the time grossly outweighs the potential benefit of me being able to rack that slide and make a sound with it. So yeah. Everything that Matthew said, plus, yes, while technically it might be a deterrent for someone to hear that sound, I don't think it's a significant probability on its own. So yeah, my 2 cents on that.
And Jared makes a good point, and I know we're short on time. Jared in the comments said, I wonder from a legal perspective what racking the slide would be considered a threat. And I would say, any law that, talks about brandishing a gun, there's brandishing a firearm and racking the slide has this very specific message that's being sent, right? Like it's not like you don't intend to use the gun. Racking the slide to me would say, yes, you're showing some sort of intent or conveying a message to whoever is there that you have a firearm and you intend to use it, or want them to know that you intend to use it. So I think that there is definitely a level of force, even if you're not pointing a gun at somebody, a level of force higher than just merely maybe exposing the gun and putting your hand on the grip of the gun, right? I think that's a considerably higher level of force. So yeah, much lesser things are considered naughty. So surely racking the slide is going to meet the qualifications. Yep. Aggravated assault is when you put someone else in fear that you're going to hurt them with something with deadly force. So if I put someone else, I do something, some sort of action or movement with the intention that the other person will fear
that I might hurt them in a way that's deadly, serious bodily injury, like a gun, that's aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. And in most jurisdictions, that's a minimum of 10 years in prison if convicted. Wait, no, that'd be menacing. I always get menacing and aggravated assault backwards. That would be felony menacing, and it's effectively the same consequence in bad naughtiness. Aggravated assault would be if they feel, even if it wasn't my intention, if they felt that they were put in fear of their life, then that's aggravated assault. So it's all about whose perspective, but same problem, negligible difference. So yeah, racking the slide probably going to be a serious legal problem if you're not justified to do so, right? Remember, the self-defense is an admission of guilt, but with just cause for why you did it. So putting someone in fear that you might hurt them with a gun is illegal, but you can claim that you did it because it was self-defense. And that's the question, right? Are you justified in claiming self-defense? Mm-hmm. All right, my last thought here. And it's been a long time. This is one that's kind of a Jacob soapbox issue, and so I know other people may not think it's as big of a deal. And I already alluded to it earlier in the episode, but this is going to be my final thought about this incident in Alaska, and that is the citizen's arrest thing. We have a comment from a viewer on Facebook who says he loves how I keep using the word naughty. I've been using the word naughty a lot lately because it's very clear and simple. Like everyone knows what I mean when I say they're doing something naughty. Or you're trying to change their naughty behavior, like that's good enough. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted by the live viewers comment. So a citizen's arrest is something that I think every jurisdiction in America allows for in some way or form. There tend to be two distinct things that vary in a citizen's arrest laws. The first is what has to happen for you to be able to perform the arrest. And the second is how can you perform the arrest? So before we get into those two things, I want, Matthew, you're a former cop. Mm-hmm. I'm not, never had a badge. But let's just quickly define arrest. Like when we say arrest, what is an arrest? Like what qualifies in your perspective as an arrest?
Yeah, so I mean, you there's different types of arrest, but there's like an in custody arrest where somebody is cuffed and they're not free to move and they're taken into a jail. And then there's arrest of somebody's movement, like you're just keeping them from being able to go. So think of like a traffic stop. That's considered by definition, it's an arrest. It's just an infraction is an arrest. You're not free to go. If you get up and start running away, the officer has legal right to stop you and physically keep you from going. So you're under arrest. You're just not in cuffs going to the jail. So there's different levels of arrest. So somebody might say, well, I was just stopping this person from going because, they stole a pack of cigarettes or whatever. I wasn't arresting them. Well, if you're keeping them from going, in some definition, it can be considered an arrest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the two phrases I most often use to define arrest are a submission to custody or preventing escape. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you submit someone to custody, which is kind of the first one you referenced, that's an arrest. And if you prevent their escape, that's also a form of an arrest. So when we say a citizen's arrest, I'm talking about someone without a badge preventing some other person from being able to leave or submitting them to custody, like physically restraining them. Okay. So that's going to be roughly the definition of an arrest. So now coming back to the citizen's arrest thing. So depending on the jurisdiction, the two things that are going to vary are how and when. So let's start with when. I tend to see two different versions of this, depending on the state, or sometimes it's a county or city thing, but most of the time this is a state law level thing. And one version that I see, and I'd call this one the most often, is you can perform an arrest for anytime you witness somebody else committing a crime. And some jurisdictions will put a specific parameter on the type of crime. So maybe I can perform an arrest if I physically witness the other person commit a felony or a crime involving XYZ. So something like that, somewhere along those lines. There are jurisdictions, I'm thinking of one in my head right now, where you don't have to witness it. So, maybe you just need to have reasonable belief that the crime, X type of crime, has been committed. So I wasn't in the bank when they robbed the place, but I see some dudes running out of the bank holding bags and wearing ski masks. In some jurisdictions, that would be enough to perform the citizen's arrest. So that's the when issue. The when issue, depending on the jurisdiction, is going to have something to do about whether or not you have to witness it or just have reasonable cause to believe it happened, and what level of crime has to have been committed. And that's going to vary by jurisdiction. All right, now let's talk about the how. I've been saying this for years. No one has yet to prove me wrong or call me out. And so I'm pretty confident that my research is accurate. I don't think there's a jurisdiction in America where a non-badge holding individual like myself or you today, Matthew, can use deadly force or the threat of deadly force to perform a citizen's arrest. I'm pretty sure that's illegal everywhere. I know every state I've checked, it's definitely illegal. It always talks about physical force or degree of force up to physical force, might be warranted or legal. But you can't threaten someone with a gun or shoot them in order to submit them to custody or prevent their escape. That's probably illegal. Now, again, you could do it if you could justify it by self-defense, right? Well, submitting them to custody, preventing their escape was the only way to protect this person's life or to protect my life, or if you can justify it through the self-defense narrative, that's a different thing. But the act itself is criminal. So if I don't have an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury, and I'm preventing someone's escape or submitting them to custody, that's probably illegal if I do it with a gun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And see, and well, I don't want to hijack your point because your point is super valid and important. It dovetails exactly into what I was thinking throughout this whole episode, is that just because somebody doesn't get charged with the crime, or just because something ends up with a good outcome, doesn't mean there weren't procedural things that were done wrong, or even legal things that were done illegally. So a lot of times people do stuff and they're like, see, that person didn't get arrested. Well, just because they didn't get arrested doesn't mean they didn't do something illegal. There's a vast discretion in police departments and prosecutors and stuff like that. So a lot of times I think myths get kind of perpetuated because they see an article or they see a story and say, see, the person didn't get arrested, or see, that person didn't have a round in the chamber, they didn't have the gun with them, they didn't intend to use it, they just pointed it and everything it turned out great. And then you use that as the beacon or the prototype for all cases or for every use of force. And then you're like, well, why am I sitting in a jail cell? Because we just covered a story where a guy chased down a car burglar and shot at him and killed him. And he's in prison for, being charged with murder right now. And it's like, why that guy probably saw an art. I mean, I know there's cases where people have chased people down and shot them and haven't gotten charged. I know. I can think of cases we covered on the podcast. Don't base your actions or stuff off of, a news article or something like that. That's, I guess, my point.
Yep. So if by some random miracle, Nicholas Moore in Fairbanks, Alaska, if you happen to listen to this, know that we still think the world of you. We're grateful that you're an armed citizen. We're grateful that you were willing to put yourself at risk to come to the aid of innocent people. We weren't there. We didn't see what you saw. We don't know what you knew. But we think that it's great what you did. And wherever you are in your journey as a gun owner, we applaud you for the forward progress that you've made. And anyone else who would think that, that they're similar to Mr. Moore, know that I would say the same thing to you. I think all of us have room for improvement. And that's kind of the core of what we're talking about here, is identifying where we can improve and learning from other people's circumstances so that we can have easy lessons, not hard ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that's a wrap today, guys, on today's episode number 496. We appreciate you spending the time with us today. A reminder, this episode is brought to you by XS Sites and by Legal Boundaries by State Gun Law Reference Book. The links are in the show notes. Like always, we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and to send us any feedback or questions you have. Use the email address podcast@concealedcarry.com. Guys, get on concealedcarry.com. Please give us an opportunity to earn your business. We sell a lot of products there. Use the tools that we make available that are free. Download our app, all the awesomeness out there. I encourage you to engage with us and make this a bigger part of your lifestyle than it is today. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. Matthew, any final words?
Yes, thanks for listening, guys. We really appreciate all of you guys' support.
Yep, and Riley Bowman should be back next week. So if you missed him, well, don't say anything. We don't want to build up his ego. So with that, remember to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care. Thanks, everyone who's been with us live today on Facebook and YouTube. We appreciate those of you who carve out your time, not just to listen to the podcast, but to be here live with us. That's an appointment kind of thing, and we know that it's not convenient. And we appreciate you guys who do it. Not the vast majority of you who participate live don't write any comments. You're just listening, and that's fine. Maybe you're multitasking, doing something else, but we're grateful, and we really appreciate that you take the time to participate live with us here on Facebook or YouTube. So awesome sauce. With that, that's the end of the broadcast. Until next week.